Hello, welcome to our webinar on managing risks, ensuring women's inclusion, and communicating clearly in COVID-19 digital payments responses. I'm Michael Wiegand, Director of Financial Services for the Poor at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I'm introducing this webinar today because we partner with each of the 15 dynamic organizations sharing their valuable expertise. These organizations have pivoted their work in response to the COVID-19 pandemic to help governments around the world digitize payments to reach those most seriously affected by the pandemic. Today we will have 3 topics covered in this webinar. The first is responsible practices to address 7 major risks in COVID-19 digital financial transfers. Key speakers are Kaizam Masali, the Asia Pacific lead for UN's Better Than Cash Alliance, Raf Mazer, consumer protection specialist for the Innovations for Poverty Action. In the second topic, the participants will discuss ensuring women's inclusion in COVID-19 digital financial response. The speakers are Gisela Davico, the Latin America and Caribbean lead and gender lead for UN's Better Than Cash Alliance, and Megan O'Donnell, the Assistant Director, Gender Program, and Senior Policy Analyst for the Center for Global Development. The third topic today will be communicating clearly in COVID-19 digital financial transfers. The speaker here will be Arshi Adil, Manager, Government and Social Impact in the Digital Financial Services domain at Microsave. Please note this webinar is recorded, so you can always come back and listen to it. You'll also find all the documents referenced on the organization's own websites and the following website hosted by the Center for Global Development, g2p-network.org. So that is g2p-network.org. A warm welcome to all governments who have joined from around the world. Enjoy a time of rich learning that will enable you to better serve those so badly affected by the pandemic. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kaizam. I'm the Asia Pacific lead at the Better Than Cash Alliance.
Hi, I'm Raf Mazer, Project Director for Consumer Protection at Innovations for Poverty Action.
We are members of the COVID-19 Global Situation Room on Responsible Practices. Other members of this group include, from the Better Than Cash Alliance, Dr. Ruth Goodwin-Groin and Isveri Sivalingam. From the Center for Global Development, Dr. Alan Gelb. From the Office of the United Nations Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, Mr. David Symington. From the World Food Programme, Ms. Astrid de Vallon. And from World Bank's G2PX initiative, Ms. Ana Georgina Marin Espinoso, as an observer. The working group sought to identify the greatest risk in delivering COVID-19 digital transfers, and secondly, to adapt the prior work on responsible practices to address those risks in COVID-19. The primary audience are governments and agencies implementing large-scale digital financial transfer programs. The complex implementation challenges of these transfers amplify risks that, if not addressed, will reduce the effectiveness of these transfers. There are, however, useful and easily available resources to help mitigate those risks. Based on the experience of working with COVID-19 responses in countries ranging from the least developed to the most developed, we have identified 7 heightened risks resulting from the speed and scale of COVID-19 digital transfer programs. They are in priority order because if the first 2 risks are adequately addressed, the others will be less serious. Let's take a quick look at them. They're explained in greater detail in the report that our working group has put together. Firstly, inadequate complaints and feedback mechanisms and lack of real-time resolution of grievances. This could lead to unrest, further health issues, and a lack of trust in the program. The scale of COVID-19 program poses many administrative challenges, and there is evidence that if this has created many opportunities for fraudsters seeking to access beneficiaries' accounts. There is a need then, therefore, to develop simple, appropriate, consumer-friendly feedback and complaint processes that are rolled out alongside any COVID-19 program. Secondly, low financial and digital literacy among recipients coupled with unclear communication on program details. Thirdly, exclusion of current and potential beneficiaries. Individuals or households may be excluded from the financial transfer programs simply because of an absence of a defined database that can easily identify intended beneficiaries or beneficiary groups that are geographically dispersed. Thirdly, invisibility of migrant laborers, often a large share of the informal workforce. Fourthly, limited information on eligibility criteria and how to register for and receive transfers. And lastly, forcibly displaced people who may be excluded. The second broader category can be intended beneficiaries who are part of these lists. However, they do not yet have digital financial services or for whom digital payments are not possible. For example, women in particular are less likely to access digital portals, including, of course, contingencies like refugees and the internally displaced people. The high transaction failure rates, and transaction failure rates could be a result of poor connectivity, the weaker system of a payment partner, or simply a mismatch in biometric and identities. Lack of knowledge, information about nearest cash out points was a huge risk that we saw exacerbated in COVID-19. And lastly, the last risk, overcharging of fees for cash out and transactions. To help stakeholders, the report is organized in three key components. Firstly, identifying global good practices pre-COVID-19 and during COVID-19 from a range of governments, humanitarians, and other organizations implementing large-scale digital transfers. Secondly, reflecting on the responsible digital payments guidelines to more deeply anchor the risk against globally recognized and implemented guidelines. These guidelines were first launched in 2016 by the Better Than Cash Alliance. And following COVID-19, the Alliance and its 75 members of governments, companies, and international humanitarian organizations are updating this important resource. And lastly, to start identifying actions that the diverse range of stakeholders involved in the payment value chain can take to mitigate these risks, these heightened risks in COVID-19.
Let's dive into one of the key risks: inadequate complaints and grievance redressal mechanisms in COVID-19 transfer programs. Grievance redressal mechanisms, or complaints and feedback mechanisms, are emerging as a lifeline for poor people across the world, especially for first-time users of digital payments and those who were previously excluded. Traditionally in digital payments, the role of ensuring proper recourse is one that has often skewed the burden of solving issues toward the beneficiary or the client. Regulators may require the existence of a recourse system, but much more collaboration opportunities exist to define criteria, quality, and accessibility of a recourse system that works for these type of beneficiaries. For example, when a woman working a garment factory in Bangladesh receives notices of her wages via notification on her mobile phone, but the amount the cash in, cash out agent outside the factory gives her does not appear to be correct, whom should she talk to? Is it the digital financial service provider? Is it the agent? Or is it her boss at the factory? This scenario is all too common for many recipients of digital payments across the world, and the resulting confusion and frustration can derail efforts to transition from cash to digital payments for payers. As a result, many consumers, and especially those new to digital payments transfers, as we've seen in COVID-19, have little or no awareness of where to go when they have a problem. These guiding principles are critical for ensuring access to and resolution of grievances in the crisis, and we've explained them in greater detail in the report. There are a number of actions that regulators, digital financial service providers, and the payers of digital transfer programs can take. For example, Beyond the regulatory standards on complaints mechanisms, digital transfer programs can require real-time feedback and complaints from users to be tracked and prioritized. In particular, for digital transfer programs, they can set requirements and define responsibilities for real-time grievance redressal solutions. They can require feedback and complaints to be tracked, prioritized, and reported daily. And if APIs are available, they can integrate the feedback and complaint systems of programs and providers and establish clear roles and responsibilities across the stakeholders. In summary, we hope this resource is an opportunity to improve the implementation of digital financial transfers for the longer run, as well as to boost digital financial inclusion. Thank you for listening.
Good morning, my name is Gisela Davico. I am the Latin American Regional Lead and Gender Lead with the Better Than Cash Alliance.
And hello, I'm Megan O'Donnell. I'm Assistant Director for Gender at the Center for Global Development.
So we all know that unfortunately, COVID-19 has caused an unprecedented health, economic, and social crisis that is threatening the poverty and inclusion gains that have been made over the last decade. And women made up the majority of the world's frontline health workers, so they may have higher risk of exposure to the virus. And as well, they're facing more negative social and economic impact than men. We have seen that in many low and middle income countries, most women in paid work are working informally. And this sector has been particularly hard hit by the lockdown measures. We learn from new data from the OECD Facebook World Bank report that in several sub-Saharan Africa countries, about 60% of women-led small businesses have lost their sources of income. That means 3 times more than businesses led by men. Also, with the lockdown measures, women have been experiencing an increased burden on their time as school and childcare centers had been also closed. Also, with this public health emergency, there could be disruption to key health services for women and girls, exposing them also to risks. And also, we have seen that during this lockdown, there has been an increase in intimate, partnered, and other forms of violence against women and girls, causing what UN Women is labeling as a shadow pandemic. So in this context, government-to-person payments can help ease financial strains caused by loss of income and employment, support food security, access to health services, and decrease household tension that could lead to domestic violence. But to ensure that effectively serve these purposes, emergency payment must be designed and implemented with a gender lens to ensure that we are reaching women and girls. In the exclusion working group, we decided to focus on COVID-19 emergency payments. Why? To ensure that low-income women do not fall further into vulnerability that can put at risk hard-fought gains made by countries in recent years. Direct financial transfers are a central part of COVID-19 response programming across the globe. World Bank had estimated that over 100 countries have expanded social protection measures in response to COVID-19, with many using digital payments to provide transfers directly into bank accounts or mobile wallets. In this case, it's key to apply a gender lens to these emergency payments to improve the impact, given that women are more vulnerable to the pandemic's effects than men, as we just mentioned. As we're going to see later with Megan, we intended to map a gender-responsive user journey for cash transfer recipients within the context of COVID-19. In addition, our working group also advanced reflections on key enablers for digital payments that can support women in a better way. These enablers provide the infrastructure, regulation, and policy environment to quickly deploy cash transfers using prepaid cards, mobile wallets, or directly into accounts. What are these enablers? First, connectivity. Digital G2P payments require people access to digital connectivity and adequate telecommunications. But due to gender barriers across low and middle income countries, still 3 million women are not accessing mobile internet. To support rapid deployment of transfers, we need to have the right payment infrastructure. For example, that would mean having interoperable payment switches, mobile bank agent network distribution, universal digital identification, and instant notification to customers on payments. But at the present, women are less likely to have access to ID, and also they face challenges accessing bank agents. The third point will be policy and regulation. An amendable policy and regulatory framework for digital financial services is an important element of scaling up an emergency cash transfer program effectively, inclusive for women and girls. It is important to have a clear legal framework for permissibility of electronic money, in addition to regulations allowing mobile payment services to be offered by non-bank payment service providers, and also building a competitive and interoperable digital financial service ecosystem helps to reduce the cost for beneficiaries to transact at any access point, what is very important in the context of this pandemic and social distance. In addition to key enablers, there are some underlying principles for gender-inclusive digital financial services ecosystems which are important to keep in mind. First, it's important to have non-discriminatory regulation that can prevent women opening accounts. Then, also important to have sex-disaggregated data, and also having gender norms that encourage women's and girls' equal agency and autonomy. So having said this, over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Gisela. Now, as Gisela briefly mentioned, to help governments and donor institutions in designing and implementing inclusive G2P payment schemes, our group focused on mapping a gender-responsive user journey for cash transfer recipients within the context of COVID-19. To do this, we created a persona, Leila, to walk us through this journey. And we certainly recognize that women are not a monolithic group sharing one identical experience, but thought that what we've called Leila's journey would be a helpful way for transfer scheme designers and implementers to better understand how women face a range of gender-specific constraints at each stage of a social transfer program. And we aim for the following slides to allow social transfer developers and implementers to better understand how different women, including older women and those living with disabilities, navigate touch points across a social transfer user journey and anticipate women's needs, expectations, and preferences during each part of the journey to design a better end-to-end experience. We see the different steps across this ideal journey from the point of view of the cash recipient, Leila. As reflected here, this includes her initial engagement in a needs assessment exercise, to then increasing her awareness regarding the existence and nature of a particular transfer scheme, then determining her eligibility for benefits, her onboarding into the program, delivery of payments, and finally extending her capabilities to save, spend, or invest the transfer, and continue her engagement with financial services. Now, across the journey, a woman like Leila can face barriers, causing her to lose trust in the process or restricting her ability to fully engage with it. Every time this happens, the program is failing, and we are failing women like Leila. For example, Leila can receive unclear messages from program implementers, have inadequate access to complaint and feedback mechanisms or an opportunity to resolve grievances, or even fail to learn about or access a program that she is eligible for at all. Now, we see that these risks can be magnified in the COVID context. For example, an initial needs assessment may be entirely waived as governments and donors seek to move quickly to get cash to as many people as possible in the face of rising income insecurity. But of course, this waiver means that the specific needs of women and other vulnerable groups may not be fully considered. At the awareness raising phase, Leila can struggle with first receiving and then fully understanding the information delivered on a transfer scheme, perhaps due to limited mobility tied to restricted gender norms or time constraints imposed by unpaid care work burdens, now coupled with COVID stay-at-home orders. She may also have less access to networks and digital platforms distributing this information, or limitations on her own skills, basic literacy and numeracy, as well as digital and financial literacy, which is a risk particularly prevalent among older women. As Leila then seeks to understand whether she is eligible or not for a transfer program, there's a risk of excluding her if eligibility information is only available through digital channels, given that fewer women have access to mobile phones and the internet than men, or if she is not allowed to move freely to a physical location to register. During onboarding, Leila needs to be able to understand how to open a transaction account in her own name and how to use it. She may not have experience with digital payment methods or electronic platforms used for communication and program management. During this onboarding, Leila may also face harassment from authorities or be subject to requests for sexual favors in exchange for onboarding. She may be restricted if onboarding is in person and she faces those mobility restrictions I mentioned, whether due to COVID orders, gender norms, or a physical disability. Risks for exclusion also apply at the delivery stage. Leila may not be able to travel to cash out locations because of those mobility restrictions, or she may lack trust in a system she is unfamiliar with. She may be unaware of redress systems that have been set up in case something goes wrong. And lastly, even if Leila is able to successfully enroll in a transfer scheme and receive payments, she may face barriers to using the money she receives in a way that benefits her and her family. She may face pressures from her spouse, relatives, or community members to share the funds with them rather than exercise agency in saving or spending them herself. So in light of all of this, what can policymakers do to mitigate these risks we just mentioned? Now, here we present a set of recommendations to guide policymakers and program implementers in ensuring women are included in and benefit from transfer programs. First, we recommend retaining and adjusting needs assessments to the COVID context wherever possible, whether by interviewing women remotely or, where necessary, drawing on past data and evidence to understand women's gender-specific needs in a given context. Then, when raising awareness about a program, it's important for implementers to communicate through multiple channels in local languages. These channels can include local savings groups and other networks women rely on, radio, TV, web portals, social media, and SMS. If using a hotline or hiring agents, it's good practice to prioritize hiring women who can more easily reach other women, especially in socially restrictive contexts, and build trust. When targeting recipients, a good practice is to prioritize targeting women to receive cash benefits to increase her likelihood of exercising decision-making in allocating funds. That said, program designers and implementers should also recognize and mitigate against potential disruptions in intra-household dynamics, such as the risk of increased intimate partner violence. Now, in the context of the pandemic, it is useful to designate convenient, accessible cash out points to ensure women do not need to travel long distances or crowd around one single cash out point. To ensure women are not excluded, policymakers need to ensure women are not experiencing barriers in terms of costs, including those related to transport or additional fees, or possible abuses of power by authorities. On the supply side, it's important that agents and local financial institutions acting as cash out points understand key features of the program and its recipients, and of course have adequate liquidity, cash on hand, to support program delivery. Lastly, where relevant, implementers should provide incentives to women to encourage them to continue using their accounts, creating pathways to using other financial services, notably savings, but over the long term, appropriately designed credit and insurance.
Thank you so much, Megan, and thank you so much to the audience.
Hello, everyone. Very glad to be a part of this webinar today. My name is Arshi Adil, and I'm representing Microspace Consulting. We are a consulting firm working towards building meaningful financial, social, and economic inclusion. For this webinar today, I would like to share our experiences on working on communication aspects on social protection programs. We would discuss how poor communications impact the delivery of the program. We would talk about various challenges faced by program recipients and the last mile workers. And we would also discuss a framework that would help us understand and make better and effective communication. Before I begin, I would like to extend my gratitude to our working group partners, starting from Strategic Impact Advisors, Everyone Mobile, African Development Bank Group, World Food Program, Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, Well-Made Strategy, Caribou Digital, and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Thank you all for your continuous support in this work. Now, moving towards the topic. So, as a response to COVID-19, close to 1,180 programs have been implemented in more than 200 countries to help about 1.3 billion people. However, it is often observed that less than 50% of the intended recipients are aware of the eligible benefits and how to access them. This lack of information leads to exclusion of deserving recipients, rumors, assumptions, lack of credibility, eroding trust in governments, and most importantly, poor impact of the government programs. Now, MSC's work done in India and Indonesia highlights the poor awareness of the entitlements amongst the program recipients. Only 41% of the households in India were aware of the benefits provided by the government during COVID-19. This level of information was even less in rural areas. Now, similarly, the Indonesian government started an initiative to register complaints during COVID-19, and more than 81% of the complaints registered were regarding the access and entitlements of social protection programs. Now, that brings us to the main point, which is communications are consistently the weakest link in delivering social protection programs. Our research reveals that most program recipients only possess the macro level program details. They often lack nuanced information on the eligibility, registration process, entitlement, rejection, and grievance resolution, amongst others. Also, at the supply side, the frontline workers play a critical role as they help facilitate the flow of information between the governments and the people, especially in remote areas. But even they do not receive regular and accurate information about the changes that the governments announced during COVID-19. They should get clear information about program-related operational details, their compensations, technical guidelines, about the channels to be used to spread information during a pandemic. And one thing that I would like to highlight is that I've often noticed that grievance resolution mechanism often works to register the complaints of the program recipients, but never the frontline workers. They also have their set of challenges that need to get immediate attention from the program implementers and the government. Special attention must be given to the challenges of communicating to vulnerable groups and how can those be reduced. Without sufficient outreach, these vulnerable groups are likely to become even more vulnerable and excluded. So the first step to build communication for such high-risk groups is to identify them. Now, how do we do that? These people often have poor literacy levels, they have limited access to technology, internet, they have disabilities, they belong to indigenous and migrant populations, they live in remote areas, and are more likely to not receive the desired communication. So it then becomes very important for implementers and governments to understand the communication barriers that these vulnerable groups face regarding their identity, culture, their social, environmental, economical, or geographical context, their lack of access to media. They can also have challenges regarding certain behavioral issues, fear, hesitation maybe, and they often have challenges due to disability, immobility, and even health issues for that matter. So the main point is that a single communication channel does not work for the vulnerable population. So they need to be provided information through multiple channels involving the community leaders and frontline workers. who are trained in local languages to ensure that the messages have a wider reach. Now, before we move to the next section, I would like to talk about a communication tactic being used for the vulnerable populations in Kenya. Now, Korogocho is the fourth largest informal settlement in Kenya. Most people are living in very cramped spaces, in tin and mud shacks, with open sewers and narrow paths. And these people do not have any access to social and mainstream media, making them even more vulnerable during a pandemic. Even the public dissemination materials were being torn down, and often they were used as toiletries. So, Hope Raisers, a community organization, used these murals and artworks. They painted the walls to raise awareness, and that was a very innovative technique to spread information about coronavirus, and that seems to have really worked out. Now, how do we solve all these communication related challenges? So we need a strategic approach to build effective communications, and we use well-made strategies, 6-step frameworks to develop impactful communication. So we will discuss each of the steps one by one. So the first step is about clearly defining objectives. So every social protection program should define what is the program trying to change. These objectives should be focused. They should be clearly defined to help program recipients understand multiple policy changes and reforms announced during a crisis. They should be timely. Objectives should secure the buy-in of all relevant stakeholders and make sure that everybody gets information without any delay. The communication objectives should be transparent. So we have multiple examples where the communications go wrong, leading to rumors and misconceptions. For example, many recipients in India rush to withdraw their payments immediately when their bank accounts got credited, largely because they feared that the government might reverse the payments if money was not immediately withdrawn. Moving to our step two. Step two highlights who are we trying to influence. Identification of various stakeholders whose engagement will help fulfill the communication objectives is essential for the judicious use of the resources, especially the budget. Now, these stakeholders may include existing and potential program beneficiaries, frontline workers, local opinion leaders, and NGOs, etc. Step 3 is to do an audience analysis, a study of the target audience, their life cycle, their typical aspirations for the program will help us identify the messages and channels suitable for them. For instance, Government of India partners with many NGOs and civil societies to connect with beneficiaries due to their large on-ground presence. Similarly, in Brazil, program recipients for a cash transfer were identified by local governments and community leaders, again, due to the increased presence and last mile reach. Next step, moving to the next step, which is step 4, that highlights what do we want our audiences to know and do. So messaging should be focused and not generic. It is very important to factor in the significant differences in demographics and social cultural situations of people, especially in the rural and urban geographies. Beneficiaries should have access to clear and concise information about their entitlements, eligibility, and other program related nuances in the most simplified manner. And the messages should be in the local languages and designed to overcome the exclusion factors such as illiteracy or disability, etc. Moving to our step 5, which is about tactics and channels. So communication channels should be largely selected based on their reach, frequency, and credibility. For instance, television helps us spread macro level information about the program, but it needs to be supplemented with other channels to spread the granular program information. SMSs are more popular amongst the literate population, but they cannot be the only communication tool, as many still do not own a mobile phone. It is essential to understand that not one source of communication is enough to reach out to diverse set of recipients that we have. So using multiple channels can help target a variety of audiences across gender, age groups, literacy rates, and location, urban or rural. Moving to our last step, which is monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning. So this step is certainly the last, but the very important one. So it helps us identify if the communications are influencing the target audiences. So the impact of the communication efforts can be gauged in four simple ways. First is to define what exactly do we want to measure. Second is to collect feedback on the effectiveness of communication aspects. Third is to learn an analysis of successful and less successful decisions made for communication. For example, different governments use different channels, different tools for communication. Some of them are huge success, while some of them fail. So it becomes very important that all of these lessons and learning are fed into the program to improve the overall outcomes of the program. And that is what our step 4 talks about. So that brings us to the end of the 6 steps of this communication framework that we just discussed. Today, governments across the globe face this Herculean task of managing the COVID-19 crisis with so much of information. So we believe that use of this well-made strategies framework for communication can help governments and the program implementers assess and significantly improve the effectiveness of existing communication strategies for social protection programs. And with this, I would like to end the session and look forward to questions from the audience. Thank you.